INTJ, INFJ, INFP, INTP. 4 letters. 4 interiors. Same withdrawal, different machinery. This is not about introversion. This is not about being private. This is about the detachment mechanism. The precise cognitive move where the mind steps back before the body knows it has been left alone. The room doesn't change. The conversation doesn't stop. The day continues at normal speed. But somewhere behind your eyes, a lever is pulled. No drama, no announcement. Just a quiet disengage. You are still present, but the system is no longer responding. For INxx types, detachment is not emotional avoidance. It is architecture, a built-in emergency protocol. When reality becomes cognitively inefficient, when meaning overloads, when values fracture, when patterns collapse, the mind does not scream. It withdraws its electricity. And each INxx type does this differently. Same silence, different reason, different cost. Detachment is not one thing. It only looks uniform from the outside. Inside, the motives diverge sharply. This is where people misunderstand you, and where you misunderstand yourself. INTJ detachment is not emotional. That's the first lie others tell about you. And sometimes, the first lie you accept. What actually happens is quieter. Your NI detects a system trajectory that no longer leads anywhere meaningful. Your TE runs the numbers. Efficiency drops. Control erodes. Return on effort approaches zero. So you disengage, not angrily, not dramatically. You stop investing. The moment you realize a system cannot be optimized, you remove yourself as a variable. This can look like coldness. It isn't. It's strategic abandonment. An INTJ detaches when goals stop making sense, when authority loses coherence, when relationships no longer respond to structure, when effort stops compounding and begins to drain. At that point, staying doesn't feel loyal. It feels unintelligent. This is the fracture. What you call objectivity often hides a refusal to tolerate uncertainty. You don't detach because you don't care. You detach because outcomes matter more than presence. And sometimes, the system you walk away from is a human being. A cold sentence. Accurate. Jung would call this a dominance of introverted intuition supported by extroverted thinking. A psyche that values inner vision validated by external execution. When execution fails repeatedly, the psyche disengages. Cleanly. Too cleanly. INFJ detachment is misunderstood as serenity. It is not. It is emotional overflow. Your NI synthesizes meaning relentlessly. Your FE absorbs relational data constantly. You don't just feel your emotions, you process everyone else's. Tone, expectation, disappointment, unspoken need. At some point, the system exceeds capacity, so the psyche pulls back, not to be alone, but to stop bleeding inward. An INFJ detaches when emotional demands never seem to end, when relationships require constant regulation, when harmony turns into maintenance instead of connection, when empathy slowly becomes obligation. The smile remains, the voice softens, but internally, the channel is muted. This is the fracture. What you call compassion often delays the moment when emotional boundaries are no longer optional. You don't detach because you lack feeling. You detach because feeling has consumed your structure. And when you finally step back, people are shocked, because you looked present the entire time. Jung would recognize this as introverted intuition filtered through extroverted feeling, a psyche that seeks meaning through relational coherence. When coherence collapses, withdrawal becomes survival. Quiet, invisible, misinterpreted. INFP detachment is not avoidance. It is moral evacuation. Your inner values are constantly checking alignment while possibility keeps unfolding, searching for meaning. You don't ask whether something is working. You ask whether it is still true. When something violates your internal value map, your psyche does not negotiate. It withdraws. An INFP detaches when authenticity feels compromised, when values are subtly dismissed, when emotional truth is minimized, when meaning turns transactional. You don't argue loudly. You don't dominate. You disappear internally first. This is the fracture. What you call staying true to yourself can quietly become a refusal to engage with imperfect reality. You don't detach because you're fragile. You detach because you cannot betray your inner compass, even when it costs connection, even when it costs growth. Jung described this as introverted feeling, a value system so internalized it becomes invisible to others. When the outer world fails to resonate, the INFP retreats to preserve meaning. But preservation is not the same as living. That's the tension. INTP detachment is not emotional distance. It is intellectual isolation. Your inner logic searches relentlessly for coherence, while ideas keep branching, multiplying, connecting. When the environment turns illogical, when repetition replaces discovery, when emotion is used as leverage, when thought becomes shallow and performative, the system shuts the door. Not out of arrogance, out of exhaustion. An INTP detaches when conversations loop without insight, when reasoning is replaced by status, when curiosity is quietly punished, when thinking becomes something to display rather than explore. So you isolate, mentally first, physically later. This is the fracture. What you call independence of thought can slowly become disengagement from lived reality. You don't detach because you're detached from people. You detach because the signal-to-noise ratio collapses. Jung framed this as introverted thinking, a psyche that demands internal precision before engagement. When precision becomes impossible, withdrawal restores order. But order alone does not create movement. That's the cost. The INTJ doesn't abandon people. They abandon inefficient systems, even when those systems are human. The INFJ doesn't disappear suddenly. They fade while still smiling. The INFP doesn't leave loudly. They leave internally and wait for the world to notice. The INTP doesn't isolate emotionally. They isolate cognitively and forget the body exists. Carl Jung never framed introversion as shyness. He understood it as direction of energy. For INxx types, psychic energy moves inward, silently, consistently. Overload accumulates without spectacle. Stress is processed privately. Withdrawal happens long before expression ever reaches the surface. Detachment is not a failure mode. It is a rebalancing act. But here is the uncomfortable truth. What protects you also isolates you. Every INxx detachment mechanism trades clarity for distance. And distance always has a price. You don't detach during crises. You detach in repetitive meetings, in small talk that never evolves, in relationships that feel fine but empty, in projects that technically work while feeling hollow. Nothing explodes. You just stop leaning forward. That's the moment most people miss. Your greatest cognitive strength becomes the exit door. For the INTJ, clarity turns into emotional absence. For the INFJ, empathy dissolves into self-erasure. For the INFP, integrity slips into disengagement. For the INTP, logic hardens into isolation. Detachment solves the immediate overload, but it quietly rewires your relationship with the world. You start observing instead of participating, understanding instead of touching, mapping instead of living, and that feels safe, too safe. Detachment is not depth. It is often fear-wearing intelligence. Sit with that. From the outside, nothing changes. You still respond, you still function, you still perform competence. Internally, the system is in low-power mode, waiting, watching, not committing. At some point, detachment stops being protection and becomes avoidance of transformation. You tell yourself, I see too much. I feel too deeply. I think too clearly. But the real issue might be this. You refuse to stay present when presence demands adaptation. INTJ. You may call it strategy, but some systems only change when you stay. INFJ. You may call it compassion, but empathy without boundaries dissolves the self. INFP, you may call it integrity. But values that never face reality remain untested. INTP, you may call it logic, but thinking without embodiment goes nowhere. Detachment keeps you intact. It also keeps you unmoved. And the unsettling question remains. Not answered, not resolved. Are you detached because the world is wrong, or because engagement would require you to change something you've protected for too long?